Hey guys, so I've seen a lot of videos that fail miserably on this particular topic. So I thought I would take some time this weekend to make my own video that fails miserably on this topic, but give you some ideas about why I collect certain knives and where I assign value to those certain traits and aspects of those particular builds and what the makers produce. So as you saw in the title, this is supposed to be a discussion of production versus mid-tech versus full custom, but I have never found that being able to put any knife or any number of knives into those particular categories cleanly. So when I look at knife collecting, I look at a couple of things. What is a production? What is quote unquote mid-tech and what is quote unquote custom? So first of all, production knives, fantastic knives. This is a Benchmade here, and we'll show you a ton of different knives out of my collection. But when you build something with a process like build 100 or 1,000 blades and 1,000 handles and 1,000, you get pretty good at it. And if you can build a quality assembly line, you can cut and reduce costs drastically and bring a very quality product to the consumer. So as far as my collecting goes, I like all sorts of knives. I have all knives that range in all values across my collection because I appreciate different aspects of different knives, and they all served kind of different purposes to me. But when you are dealing with large companies that keep the machines running 24/7, you could really deliver some high quality stuff at very fair prices, and we'll talk a little bit about value in this video. The second one is, a mid-tech. And a mid-tech kind of takes the production knife, qualities that made that knife good, affordable, available, and things like that, but kind of ties it into a maker and ties it into, a certain design. And people tend to like that. And then, of course, for full custom, you have a knife that was built by a maker, whether that be hand-built or CNC'd. It has a lot of hard work that goes into it. And like many people have pointed out, there are really good productions and really bad productions and really good customs and really bad customs, and they kind of go across the board. So traditionally, customs used to be, hey, I drew this on a napkin, please make it, and a knife maker will go in their shop and make something that no one else has. That's not what I consider a custom. So for my definition, a custom is just going to be a knife built by the maker with a lot of individual attention going to that particular knife. That's kind of what I consider a custom. And if a maker has a process, where they want to build a larger quantity of knives, then I consider that a mid-tech, but the maker's hands are still all over it. And then, of course, if you just want to bring a very good value to the public, I consider that a production. But take all of that and throw it out the window. When I look at knives, I break it down by two things. A knife to me consists of the blade here and the handle. And so when I look at a knife, I don't think of it as a production, mid-tech, or custom. I look at it from that aspect. And going one step further, there are a couple ways to build a knife, both a blade and a handle. That would be completely by hand. You sit there, you take a sheet of metal and you grind it down and you turn it into whatever you want to turn it into. There are machines, CNCs, and they will build. The machines will you enter the code and you watch the machine, and the machines will produce things that really are amazing that human beings can't do and can't replicate. That's what we rely on the machines for. And the third is going to be the design. And so, I look at all, the blade and the handle, and I look at the aspects that kind of go into the creation of both the blade and handle. And from there, I decide what value I would like to place on that particular piece. So when it comes to value, that's a very individual and very personal question. $20 can be a lot of money to some people, and $20 can be not a lot of money to some people. So I just want to talk about what I consider to be value for purposes of this discussion. So my collection really ranges. It ranges from fairly inexpensive and what I consider cheap knives to knives that I consider expensive, but maybe not break the bank numbers, and then knives that I consider to be, the word that came to mind was ridiculous, but I still buy them. So I see value in them, but I think that they're a little bit ridiculous. So let's just talk about what I consider to be valuable. I consider to be money to be valuable. So when I see a lot of value and a lot of things that I think are important into certain knives, I tend to spend more money on them. What kind of goes into that would be how much time it took to produce the knife, how much skill it took to produce a knife. Of course, the overall design of the knife, that, obviously if a design speaks to you, you're prone to pay a little bit more money. And also, I know materials are very important to some people, not necessarily as important to me, but I recognize that they are very important when it comes to the discussion of value. So going back to the blade and handle structure of my discussion, I want to show some knives that I consider to be, production knives, if you're going to try to categorize them. This is a Benchmade, and I think Benchmade represents, along with Spyderco, everyone can kind of agree that these are very good knives with regards to what they can deliver to people for value. So a lot of people use these for work. When you're looking for a knife that you're going to really use and beat up and not necessarily going to collect, these two companies really represent a very good value. And so both the blades and the handles are generally mass produced, and they're produced in a wide range of ways. Sometimes the whole knife is built overseas in China or somewhere else, and sometimes that the knife is built in the United States. And of course, again, that's a personal question. If a US made product adds value to you, it certainly adds value to me, just because I want to support local business. I'm part of the global economy and also the my country's economy. So I do think that there is value in basically spending money for an American-made product, but I would not say because it's made in America, it is simply better. There are certain knives out there, like this knife here, which I still consider to be a high-end production, that really would destroy just about every production model of Spyderco or Benchmade out there. The quality, and this is a Re8. So again, while I personally favor American-made products just because I live in the U.S. and I want to help out my neighbors, I don't see where a American-made product would automatically be considered better than a foreign-made counterpart. So it's a factor that goes into my decision-making. One of the nicest production knives, I believe, is Zero Tolerance. I think that they do a fantastic job. This happens to be a Les George design, so I love the design, but it is completely production made. However, let's talk about that. It's production made with very expensive and high quality machines. So we have a production made blade and a production made handle made on some very expensive machines and done exceptionally well. And the final product is a very nice knife. So there's certain value in that, right? You get the savings of mass production. You get the power of producing thousands and thousands of knives. So you get the buying power that delivers a knife like this that has very good mechanics, very good materials, and very good quality to the end user for a couple of $100. And again, in my world, that is, or not my world, but my thoughts is that is expensive but affordable, well worth it. Tool knife / collector knife. This kind of is a nice entry into that market. So from there, we're moving up the ladder here from basically production knives into some nicer production knives, and you get into what I consider to be high-end production knife. Now, this is my Sebenza. Now, this is probably one of the older knives in my collection. I've had this for quite some time, and I use it, and it's performed very, very well. I love the Sebenza for what it is. I think if you're looking for a mix between a knife that you can go out and smash on and beat on and it's going to hold up, but a knife that makes you proud to put it in your pocket and proud to show off to your friends, Sebenzas is kind of where I feel like that market begins. And Sebenzas actually, for a price point, push you into almost kind of Midtech money here. So while the Sebenza actually, I believe, is hand ground, the quality of the hand grind, I think, is going to dictate how much value we put on the knife as a whole. So we know the handles are production made, but we know the blades are actually hand ground, but the quality of the grind and the quality of the materials also factor in. Sebenzas don't really market the fact that they have very high trained people grinding these, and the only reason why I actually don't know if they're hand ground. I assume they are because of all the forums of the kind of the asymmetrical grinds that are out there, so I assume that they're done by hand. And there are also Chinese companies, very cheap Chinese companies, and this is the only one I can think of, but this is one of my oldest knives, so I don't know if this is actually hand done. Probably not. Well, we got a little stuff on there that have people grinding by hand. But again, as far as value goes, it's the quality of the grind and it's the quality that they put into the final product. And another thing I talked about at the beginning of the video is kind of the what I consider to be the spirit and the soul of the whole thing, right? If you make something by hand, whether you do it good or bad, there's soul in there, right? If your kids make an art project, it might not be a Mona Lisa, but to you, that art is worth more than anything that's out there. So it has a lot to do with not only the mechanics, but also how much soul gets put into the knife. And from here on out, from the discussion that I'm going to have, moving into Midtechs and productions, you're paying a lot for that spirit and soul. Because at the end of the day, every knife you see, minus this one on the table, is a very good knife. These will all do the job and do it well and do it probably just as good as any custom that's out there. So if you want a little bit of spirit and a little bit of soul, what do you do and where do you go? Well, you can go into full customs, you can do that, but a lot of people can't afford the price tag that goes into full customs. And we'll talk about the full customs at the end, but from what I understand in talking to many, many makers, it takes them roughly between 20 and 40 hours to build one of these knives by hand with no machinery. And sometimes it takes 2-3 weeks. And if you get into the art knives with the engravings, which I'm not into, I mean, literally they can spend 8 hours a day for 1, 2, 3, or 4 months to produce this knife. So then you're talking about an insane amount of hours. That's heart and soul. That's a lot of time and effort getting put into these things. So the prices that they're charging are going to be pretty high up there. I don't know about you guys, but if you spent, I don't know, a week, maybe even 4 days working your entire job at something, how much money would you want to get in return? Of course, that number varies, right? Some people make a lot of money. Some people make more modest amounts of money. And again, that's going to go to the skill. But in general, custom knives, start around the $1,000 point and they move up from there. And they go all the way up to, like I said, those art knives are crazy. So if you want a maker because you like their design, you'll go into something like this. And this is considered a Midtech. And this particular knife is a Les George built Wilson Combat Eagle. And what Les does is he goes out and he has the blades made and he has the handles made. And he orders them all in. I'm sure they're all made in the U.S., but I mean, you can get them made anywhere in China or whatnot. But when it comes in, then he basically takes all the parts and puts them all together himself. Traditionally speaking, that was a Midtech, and I kind of keep in line with that traditional thought. But nowadays, there's all sorts of different makers and people training other people how to do it. So there's a lot of different products out there that kind of embody the spirit of the maker, but can deliver for a little bit less money. So here we have a Medford. This happens to be a Praetorian tie, so this is like the most expensive Medford that they make. Greg never touched this particular knife. But what Greg has done is he's built a company where he uses machines, and we'll talk about that as well. We have the CNC machines building the handles, so those are machine made. But he's trained guys to come in and take his design, and there's some value there, and actually hand grind the blade. So a lot of people consider these production. Greg calls it hand tech. A lot of people will call it whatever tech, custom tech, you name it. But all that means is Greg thinks that there is value in American veterans, as he markets it, having a job on a grinder and grinding your blades. And he feels that you are going to have value in that, and that you're going to purchase the knives. Well, for me, he's right. I see a lot of value in that. So I don't mind spending that type of money on these type of knives. That's a personal choice, but when you're comparing a $1,000 knife, a $500 knife, to a $100 knife, the debate gets exciting, to say the least. So I consider the Medfords to be kind of a high-end production / mid-tech. I kind of see them all kind of in the same neighborhood. And I'd even consider this to be a similar class of knife. And what you're looking at here is a Re8 K1. And the reason why I'd say that this is a similar class of knife, and this is a knife that's made in China, is because instead of marketing American-made, handmade in America, because they're not, they're made in China, the owner of the company, I think his name is David Dang, has decided that he is going to use machinery, train people, maybe not veterans who are Americans, but this is still a hand-ground blade, and then he's going to put a lot of really nice materials on this and really worry about things that people like the action, so he can charge what he charges for these knives. These two knives here, folks, are pretty much the same price. And you're going to have two sides of the coin on this. You're going to have the people who say, I would never spend any notable amounts of money on a Chinese-made product, or especially a Chinese-made knife. And again, that's value, that's very personal, and that's their opinion. I'm not trying to discuss it, but certainly other people would say, man, look at the materials on this thing. Look at the Damasteel, look at the Mokutai, and then the fit and finish is amazing. This is a drop-free knife, right? For a production knife, this is a very smooth, very nice feeling knife. Whereas the Medford, not as well refined, right? I mean, it feels big, bulky. That blade won't drop free. But I'll tell you what, it's hand flamed, hand ground, and made in Arizona. And the price points come out to be around the same. So I consider these to be the same class of knife. You're talking about soul. You're talking about spirit getting punched into the knife, whether it be by materials, whether it be by hand built, handmade. That's it's up to you what you consider to be valuable. And this is why, and as you can see, I have both. I really appreciate all sides of the spectrum, and I really appreciate both thoughts. But when you want to get really crazy, you want to walk into the full customs, right? And I do have a nice collection of full customs, which I'll show you. And this is where people start debating, and they said, well, handmade, CNC, blah, 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 blah. And I think, again, it's a very personal question, but I've been collecting for many years. And one of the first guys that I collected was a gentleman by the name of Les George. And I collect him to this day. And Les at one time was a very hot maker. And now, while he's still very popular, certainly there are other, makers out there that garner a little bit more attention. And a lot of things happen, they evolve, right? It's not good nor bad. It evolves. And something that's hit over the past, 5 years has been social media. And Instagram, Facebook has absolutely changed the game. It's brought a lot of new people into knives, but it's also changed what people value in knives. Back when I started collecting custom knives, Instagram really wasn't there quite yet. Facebook, it might have been around, but certainly didn't have the popularity it does. And one of the biggest things that people talked about were the grinds. And again, we'll focus back on the blade portion, okay? So back in the day, it was all about the art of taking a slab of metal, getting on a wheel, and grinding it down and coming out with something that people found to be effective and beautiful. And Les is one of the best examples of that. Les still hand grinds all of his blades. In fact, Les considers a custom something that he has hand ground himself. And of course, there's all sorts of, different paths you can go down. I mean, there's jigs, and then there's this, and then there's that. But I happen to agree with Les, because I think that when you're talking about customs, you're talking about heart and soul. And maybe you have a slab of titanium with absolutely nothing on it, and maybe it's completely cut out by a CNC machine or a water jet, and maybe the maker did absolutely nothing to embellish it, but they've put heart and soul into that blade. So once you start getting into the maker themselves has ground the blade and assembled the knife, it kind of steps up for me into custom area. And there's a lot of guys out there that will use the CNC machines, and we'll talk about another one here that's kind of on the cusp of that. This is a Cody Utzler Persian. And I love this knife, and I really enjoy Cody, and I enjoy talking to him, and I think he makes great stuff. But one thing I find interesting with Cody's progression is, first of all, he's a very young maker. So I was able to get his work that I consider to be very developed and very mature work, but at a very new stage of his knife making career. And this knife you see in front of you is completely hand built. Okay, there was no water jet, no CNC. Everything on this knife right here was materials were removed by Cody, done by Cody. Everything was done by hand. So I find a lot of value in there. But the next set of knives he's making, after he delivered this knife to me, he took delivery on a CNC machine. And speaking with him, it just makes sense, right? If people are willing to spend this kind of money, and most people just kind of want the finished end result, as we're looking at here, he can't keep up with the demand, spending a week and a half working on one blade. And he's got more customers than that. So he's leaving money on the table unless he gets himself some help. And that help can come in two ways. He can get himself a CNC machine, or he can go out and hire help. Like, Greg has both. He does CNC and he hires help to build the knives. So it will be interesting to see down the road if this knife here and the Utzlers in my collection are still considered full-on customs. Either way, this one is a beautiful knife, and I guess the question I would pose to you would be, if you can get this exact knife, this one here, everything the same, yet completely built by CNC, but Cody just does the final touches on it, would you see the same amount of value as I see, or it would be in this particular knife that was built by hand? So that's going to be an interesting topic. But I'm not sure. I think Les still does do some handles by hand. I think I have one of his knives that he did by hand. But for the most part, Les, where he puts his energy and effort is into the blades. And I consider them customs. But wait, there's more. This is a very nice knife. I was actually carrying that today. I went down to the beach, and this is a Craig Brown. This one's called a Servo. Craig is still a fairly new maker. But this can be substituted for a Grimsmo Rask. And I think there's a whole bunch of guys out there now that are making knives completely and fully on CNC. And what I mean by that is this blade is made on CNC. These handles are made on CNC. Craig does the final fitting. He puts everything together. But at the end of the day, what Craig Brown has put into this knife is the design that gets a little of his heart and soul. And of course, that's a lot of it. And he's programmed the machines. But every piece of outline you see here has been done by a machine. But I still consider this a full custom knife, because I worked with Craig on this, and I'm working with him on another knife. And, at the end of the day, he offered some unique things that you can do to your knife to kind of make them stand out. But if you watch another channel, Dr. Frunke, he got a full one-of-one, his design, his graphics got put on the knife, and, fully machine made, but still a very custom knife. There's not another one like it in the world. So there's some value there, right? I think that when Grimsmo first came out, they were charging around the same as Craig Brown charges for his knives. And as the Grimsmo saw the secondary markets double and triple what they were charging for their knives, they realized, man, people really don't care that a machine did this and a person didn't do it. So therefore, I'm going to charge custom knife money for my knives. And that's fine. It's a free market economy, and people see value where they see it. And at the end of the day, people really like the Grimsmos because they dropped free, just like that, and they were unique. And for whatever reason they were popular, what I'm saying is they were popular, and for those reasons, the value of those knives shot up, and people were paying for those knives. That doesn't make it right or wrong. That's just the value that people had assigned to them. So let's talk about this one here. Actually, I'm gonna skip this one. We'll talk about this one last. So let's talk about what I consider full-on, full-blown, pay the money, great design customs. You've probably seen this knife, this here on my channel at least. This knife is the non-flipper flipper, and it is the most expensive model that I have in my collection. And again, let's talk about a few things. First of all, the blade is kind of important, and to Stan Wilson, who made this knife, I'm sure, he talked to me about the design and the sweeping lines and the aesthetics, and that's all great. That's, it really, I'm sure there was a lot of heart and soul that went into this blade. But really, it's the handle that people want, right? That people find to be absolutely special. So I still am completely blown away that this is a completely no-machined, hand-built knife. It kind of boggles the mind. To me, it kind of looks like a machine built a machine that actually built this knife, because the tolerances are so insane. The design is so insane. I really, at times, struggle to see how a human being can have sanders, grinders, and just some hand tools, and they can make something like this. This is absolutely incredible. So therefore, I'm completely blown away by the design. I'm completely blown away by the mechanics. I'm completely blown away by the skill. My wallet was kind of completely blown away when I decided to collect these things, and that's just the value I put on there. And I hear a lot of people, and rightfully so, they'll say, I will never spend that type of money on a knife. And they're absolutely right. If you do not see any artistic value, any artistic or increase of value due to the spirit of things, then what you see in front of you is a complete and utter waste of money. However, when I was talking to Stan, these things take him over 2 weeks to build. Unbelievable that you have a full 9-to-5 job, that you go out into your shop and you build something down to the screws, down to the bolsters, down to everything, just to produce this one tool that is designed to cut things. And I am so happy that there are, crazy people is not the right word, passionate people that will do this kind of stuff, because I honestly have no idea. I guess they just evolve into doing it, but if you told me 15 years ago that someone would spend 2 weeks, a month, 2 months working on one pocket knife, I would have said they're absolutely crazy. And now I would say I am so glad they do it, because I can't get enough, and I want as many of those in my collection as possible. So in my mind, when it comes to hand-built, and there's a lot of other hand-built stuff, like I said, this is hand-built. That is tops for me. It really is. That's where I'll spend the majority amount of money, and I'll appreciate the knife much more than I would. But don't get me wrong. I love machinery. I love skill. That might not be skill working with your hands, right? Look at this knife. This is a GTC. This is a lamina. And this knife here, you can tell, a human being cannot do this. The texturing here, this is absolutely done on a CNC machine. but the skill it took Gus to program that CNC machine was the main reason why I bought this knife. Not only that, the design with the hidden flipper, so you can see it has the flipper tab here. And of course, I paid a little bit extra for the materials. So don't get me wrong, I absolutely do find value in CNCs. There's skill sets for CNCs. I find value in the materials. But for me, the hand-built stuff really gets me off. But don't get me wrong, this knife is also absolutely amazing. I love this knife as well. Which finally brings me to the last step. And yes, there is a step beyond the non-flipper flipper. There is a knife that I consider, I don't want to say special, because I think all the knives that I've gone through are absolutely special, but I consider it to be very important to me. And just like Dr. Frunke had Craig make a knife where he put kind of his stuff in there, I had Jason Overall at Larevo Knives make this knife for me. So I purchased this knife here, and both of these are considered, in my opinion, full customs. They are both completely built by hand without any automation whatsoever. But the difference is this one was sold at Blade Show 2017, and I purchased it after Blade Show. And this one was built after I purchased the knife, and I got in contact with Jason, and I asked him to build me this one. So while I did not draw a knife on a napkin, and even if I did, I'm pretty sure it would be pretty awful, I did come to him and I said, Jason, I would like this knife because I enjoy it. It's called the Tribeca model, but I want to do some changes to it. And he's like, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, well, the first thing is I want to make it a bolster lock. I like the lines. I like the split lines of the lock bar, and I just wanted to make a bolster lock. And he had never done one before. So he did it specifically for me. So to me, there's a little bit of my own request, my own design, and not design because it's still his design, but my own spirit. Not only the maker's spirit, but my own spirit went into this, which is why certain knives really appeal to people. Knives like this, which I didn't design, but Kirby Lambert, who's one of my absolute favorite makers, built this for another customer, and they got to choose this material, they got to choose this material, and they got to choose this material. Now, Kirby makes this knife, this is called the Augustus, for many of his customers, but this customer got to design the look of this knife and ended up selling it to me, which is crazy. I'm hopefully keeping this forever, but he had his design in that knife. This is one of my favorites, by the way. So this was kind of the first knife that I got to do something like that and be above and beyond it, because I actually worked with Cody to get some builds. I worked with a lot of the makers to get certain aspects of the things built into the knives, but this was the first time I actually changed the mechanics of the knife, and these are inlays. So I can take these screws off and pop them out. And I have another video on this. I've got Damasteel and I've got Carbo Quartz inlays. So it was kind of my design, my creativity. So while this knife might not be as quote unquote valuable to some people, it really is special to me because I got to choose the materials, choose the design, and I got to, form a friendship with Jason because, we went back and forth trying to get this thing hammered out. So anyway, that was just 20, 30 minutes of me rambling about what I consider custom, not custom, Midtech, but certainly, again, I'm pretty sure this video only serves to confuse people. Certainly, I appreciate all aspects of knives. We've got this knife here, which is a total contrast with these two knives because these two knives have amazing materials, but this knife mechanically, hand-built, as is this one, really is special to me, and it really probably, out of all the knives you've seen, has the most value on a secondary market because, again, people see the value in this mechanism because Stan designed it, it's unique, and they're going to pay for his ingenuity and, of course, his skill to build these by hand. But, I collect stuff built by machines as well because I think that they also have beauty in them. And when as I continue to expand my collection, I'm always looking for the next thing, whether that be a machine doing something that I've never seen before, maybe it be a design that I've never seen before, or maybe it's just a maker who's putting so much art and soul into the knife. I've never seen that before either. So I appreciate you guys spending this much time watching this video. I wish you guys the best of luck in your collection. And go ahead and hit me up if you have any questions about any of these knives or my collections. I'm on Instagram as HKWinger. My email is hkwinger99@gmail.com. And like I said, I hope you guys have a lot of fun collecting. Thanks, guys. Bye.